And welcome to the Payments Leaders Show, where I have a fireside chat with handpicked leaders from the payments industry. And they share how they lead their people, how they build winning cultures that ultimately are people-centric, and how they enable people to reach their potential whilst achieving high performance. That's one of the biggest challenges that we find in business today. Those two almost balances that. And one of the most accomplished people I've seen is Todd Latham. Todd is the CEO of Divido, which is on a mission to positively transform checkout finance. They provide the most agile platform to easily launch your own white label checkout finance solution. He focuses on aligning his team to customer need and has a significant track record of growing teams and even selling businesses throughout the payments industry. And he always leads this growth with a human and people-centered culture. So first of all, Todd, thanks so much indeed for taking the time out of your very busy schedule. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me. It's a slightly terrifying introduction now. I feel like I've got a lot to live up to. I'm not sure. It sounds better when you say it than I think it really is. But
I'll do that one day. I'll underplay a guest one day and see how that goes.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Look, I wonder if we could dive straight in, if that's okay, and just I wonder if you could share some of the choices that you've made throughout your career with us.
Yeah. So I mean, I guess when I think about my career, I think of it in two halves. And maybe there are more halves to come. Maybe there'll be thirds and quarters. But I started my career in big blue chip companies, so American blue chip companies. So I went out initially to Microsoft, worked both here and in the States for them, and then I went to Amex. So you see the kind of the big corporate American kind of thing coming all the way through, and then it was around 2013 when I made a switch, and I was sat. I remember very clearly. I was watching cricket. I'm not a big cricket fan, but I was having a few beers at the side of a village square, watching the cricket game with my wife, and we're just talking about career stuff, and we were talking about what we wanted to do in the future. And I thought, well, if by the time I'm 40, my aspiration is to run my own company. And she's like, well, you're working in Amex. How are you preparing yourself for that journey, being a marketing director in Amex? And I was like, oh shit, you're probably right. As all good things in life, circumstance played its role, and I got approached by a headhunter, I think a week later, for a role at a company called The Currency Cloud, they were then called, and this tiny obscure startup. I had no idea what I was coming into, and looking back, I made the most tremendous leap of faith. Which I don't know if I'm brave enough to do now, knowing what I know about the startup world. But actually, I love the CEO of that company. He's a really great guy called Mike Latham, and he's done this a lot of times through. And I really kind of, what I liked about them was they weren't very clear about what they wanted to do, and their proposition wasn't clear. And I said, I'm a marketing guy. I can fix this. It's all great. Took about 9 years, but we got there eventually. And I think but really, very quickly, I realised that I loved being in smaller companies, and because you can just get stuff done. I remember the example I used at the time was so at Amex, a lot of my job was building out global surveys. It would take months to roll a survey program out, right? You design your survey, you'd pitch it to the head of all the different countries. It'd all say, kind of, can we change this question? Can we put that one in? Can we take that one out? And you'd be back and forth. And by the time you launch it, you do your survey, it'd be filled for 2 or 3 weeks, and then the results would come back, and you'd pay somebody $100,000 to go and put into a lovely presentation for you, and then 2 months after the survey's even been completed, then you start saying, and this is what we heard. And it's a full 8 months after you started the process before you can start implementing it. Now, I think that's better nowadays with technology. This was 15 years ago, but you go to a startup, and I was able to design a survey, launch it, get customer feedback, and with an action plan in place in 2 weeks. And I love the pace of change, the ability to influence what's going on in the company. That's to me, that's it's just really exciting. It's really engaging, and you can get stuff done. And I think what I really learned during that process. So a couple of things I learned. One is I think I'm much more suited to small organisations. You know, I learned something about myself which I didn't really understand when I was younger. When I was younger, you know, you're told to go and you know, go and work for big names. You guess they do all the milk rounds in the universities, don't they? And everyone's encouraged to go and work for somebody cool and sexy. I think the other thing that I really I started to understand was I think when I looked at my career, I didn't look at it strategically. And actually, the best piece of advice that anyone ever gave me, they said, you know, which given I had a marketing background, it's slightly embarrassing I never thought of it this way. They're like, you figure out what your value proposition is. So, you know, what is your North Star metric? What do you want to be? Like, where do you want your career to be? And not always in like, I want to be doing this job in 5 years' time. You know, I think a lot of that stuff's a bit bullshit. But then, what are the things that make you special? And I think quite often we lack a language for the things that make individuals special, and it's very hard to pinpoint it. So, you know, if you ask that question to a lot of people, they'll say like, "Oh, I'm really good at collaboration. You know, I'm fun to be around, and you know, I like problem solving." We're like, "Well, yeah, but." So there's half the rest of the people in the world that we work in, right? Yeah, they're all smart people. So what makes you special? And I think it took a long time to understand that. And actually, the things that I find, you know, my recipe, the things that make Todd special. One is not that I'm particularly special, but I feel like I've just worked in a lot of different environments. So, you know, I started my career in finance. I've done strategy roles. I've done product roles. I've done marketing roles. I've done, you know, like actually that breadth of experience. I'm not a specialist. I'm an unabashed generalist, and that I think brings both weaknesses. I haven't got depth in a lot of subjects, but it brings a lot of strengths. And the second is I just love to get things done. You know, I think a lot of people might say that they do, but what they really mean is they like to do a PowerPoint deck, or they like to build a nice Excel model, or they you know, they want to win some people over in a meeting. I'm like, no, I actually want to see customer results. I want to see like the fruits of my labor manifested in something that's real and tangible, and customers using something and growing. And you know, to me, that's what my purpose is almost. And it's not. I'm not a purpose-driven person insofar as you get some people who are, I think, very, you know, I want to change the world. You know, I want to be building the next great thing in this space because it's going to drive humankind forward. And I think one of the great myths of our time is that everyone is purpose-driven. And actually, my experience says that you get some who are like that for sure, and companies need to have a purpose to save those people. You get some people who are driven by the people they work with and their colleagues and the environment they work in. And you get some who just want to be great at their job. And that can be anybody. It could be, I want to solve a great engineering problem, or I want to build this great finance model, or you know, I want to have, you know, I want to be great at hiring people. Whatever it is, I'm that third category. And it took me a long time to understand that about myself.
Wow. Brilliant. There's so much there. So just so I can understand just the essence of you there. So for you, the tangible result in getting stuff done, that ultimately is when you see a customer and you're solving a problem for a customer and they're tangibly using a product and it's making their business better, or it's making their life better. Is that it?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, and it's not just customers, right? It could be employees. You know, one of the most satisfying things I think for any leader, I'm not unique in this, is seeing people develop and grow in their roles, and people moving on to their next roles. And I think that's that's something that is very motivating, I think, for a lot of people. So it's having an impact, and it's having an impact at not a grand level, at a very tangible, I can see it right in front of me level.
Nice. No, I like it. So amongst many things, you are responsible for business strategy as well as growth at Divido. How do you ensure products are developed then that are inclusive and start with an empathy for customers?
I mean, it's an interesting question. I think there's lots to unpack in that. But
there's easier ones coming later. Don't worry. There's easier ones later.
That's good. I think so. I've always worked in B2B. I've done a couple of stints consumer roles, but basically I'm a B2B guy. And I think B2B is often reduced down to kind of the core components of what you're delivering. So it becomes very functional, right? We can do X at this speed and it's going to cost you Y. It's like, that's great, but it's not inspiring. And I think people have this misconception that businesses buy only based on factual, evidence-based and product features and performance and functionality. And in reality, my experience is that's not true. And when you're trying to sell B2B, actually the companies who can connect with their customers better are much more impactful and much more powerful, and actually, by the way, ultimately deliver much more value to those customers than those who focus exclusively on building great functionality. And I think really a formative experience for me was when I was in my last role at Currency Cloud, and Currency Cloud is a cross-border payments company, and what we put in place was effectively a set of we called them pods, but just super verticalized sets of people with all the components in there. So we had salespeople, we had customer success people, we had account management, we had product, all of the components you needed to deliver value to a very niche set of customers. And I think to me, the value of that approach was, yes, it was to build better products for those customers, but actually when we picked up the phone to those customers and we talked to them, we could talk their language. And you very quickly understand that a customer who's in the FX space is very different from a customer in the remittance space. They've got different needs, they use different words. They're both sending money overseas, but one is doing £500,000 transactions where 3 or 4 basis points makes a difference, and they're all about bips and spreads and they use their own language. Whereas the other one is all about, how do I enable a migrant worker to send €200 back to his family in wherever? A very, very different conversation, and it's a very different way of thinking. And so, whilst the products and the infrastructure and the underlying it is exactly the same, understanding the needs of those customers, the way you price for those customers, the way that you expose that value to those customers is really different. And the power was this: when you talk to customers and when you'd hear the feedback and surveys, what they'd say is not, we use Currency Cloud because they've got the best product, something that could come out, but actually what they say is, they get me. When I've got a business problem, I will phone up somebody at Currency Cloud and I'll talk it through with them. They're kind of at the table with me. And I think a lot of companies don't really think like that. They don't understand that. And it's really important right now. I mean, it was important during COVID. Lots of companies went through very uncertain times, and those companies that really understand their customers and get close to their customers, I think, were the ones who benefited disproportionately from COVID. And I think it'll be the same again now. We're going to go into a protracted, difficult period of, let's say, 18 to 24 months, hopefully no longer. And I think those companies that will create great businesses in this environment are those who will really take the time to properly understand their customers, to get close to them, to build relationships. And as business leaders, I think it's our job, therefore, to make sure that our employees understand that you've got the right people who have kind of embodied that approach, who you coach your people to ask lots of questions rather than selling and pushing. And I think that's when you do that, it creates this great virtuous feedback loop, which enables you to deliver great value to your customers.
Brilliant. I'm just fascinated there about the origins of that. So to go to the place there where customers are saying, actually, Currency Cloud, they get me. They talk my language, I feel comfortable. How important is then curiosity and trust to start even thinking about the customer like that?
Oh, it's critical, right? I mean, I think, I always think you need to hire curious people. If you're hiring curious people, then they'll fix all sorts of shit without you even knowing it, right? Like they've seen a problem, they've solved it before you've even noticed it was there, which is awesome. But no, I think you do need, and you need people who kind of almost beyond the pale curious, right? You know, they won't just ask that first question. They'll go almost to the point where they're a bit annoying. Yeah. But why? But really, why? And actually, it's interesting. The deals I've seen go south, it's often because the understanding of the why was superficial. You know, you're selling something to a customer, they think they understand what they're buying, you think they understand what they're buying, and actually no one understands anything. You know, it comes to a budget cycle, it comes to a difficult period, and then they look at it deeply and they're like, why are we even doing this? And the deal goes south. And I think so that getting to the why within the customer relationship is a really critical thing.
Brilliant. Love that one. Hire curious people. Brilliant. So I've heard that you are a leader who's committed to lead with decency. Can you tell us where that's come from and how you overcome the prevailing leading only with task completion?
Yeah, and then, you know, and I think so. There's two parts to that question, aren't there? There's part of decency is you know, you say hi to the cleaner in the office, right? And you ask them about their day, and it is actually it's making sure that you're human with everyone. And I think it's you know, I love this. It always stuck with me. This, I don't even know who said it now, but this idea of this guy said one of his interview filters was, did somebody chat to the receptionist on the way in, or did they kind of like almost ignore them as if they weren't there? And I think that's really important because everyone's people at different stages in their life, and I think you have to do that. I think there's a part of you know, this task completion thing though is kind of, you know, micromanagement, whatever you want to call it. I've always been the worst micromanager, not because I made a conscious choice to not be a micromanager, frankly, but I think it always felt very pragmatic to me to not micromanage people. And it's funny. I think you see it. I see it when I see people go through their careers. Sometimes when people go from that kind of like, yeah, I'm an individual contributor to my first management role, there's a bit of a tendency often to be like, I can do this better than you can, and I'm going to do it for you or I'm going to tell you exactly how to do it, and I'm not going to let you make mistakes. And I understand exactly where that comes from. But I think I've just always been a bit laissez-faire, or maybe lazy. I'm not quite sure which. But I've always thought, you know, yeah, I'll give you a general idea, go off and go and do it. But I think I made the opposite mistake early in my career, which was, and I'm sure I still make it now. I know I still make it now. Sometimes it's easy to confuse empowerment with laissez-faire. Empowerment is not letting somebody go and do what they want to do all the time. That's chaos. And I think it's really important to make sure you're clear about where you need to go, and they understand where you need to go and why, and they really understand the why, but also a little bit about the how. And I think also it's not okay to duck difficult conversations, and I think we've all got a tendency to do that. I've definitely got a tendency to do that, you know, sometimes I have to hold myself to account on it and be like, you know, I'm going to have a word with myself and say, look, this behaviour is not okay, I need to go fix it, and then I'll go fix it. But it's not my natural style. My natural style is to wait and see, and hope they'll correct it, and it doesn't always work, obviously. But for me, actually, you know, when I think about empowerment now, what I think about is context. And actually, I think for people to be their best version of themselves, for people to be able to make great decisions, to be able to do, you know, we all want empowerment, right? It's a very efficient way of building a business. It's great for people's careers, and they enjoy their jobs more, and actually get better decisions, right? Because they're close to the customer. But for that empowerment to work, they need to understand exactly what we're trying to do as a business. You know, kind of where are we trying to go to and why, and you know, what's the North Star? That needs to be super clear for people. And I think lots of people get that, but actually you need to go down a couple of levels as well. I think you need to be super clear about your values. You know, how are you going to behave? What are the things that are important? What are my expectations for how you come to making decisions? How you act with employees, with customers, And then I think the other thing you need to be very, very clear on is, how are we going to compete? What is it that makes it's same about the career thing about companies, right? What is our differentiation, and how are we going to double down on that differentiation? Because otherwise, what happens, I think, is you say, go and figure out this problem, and you'll come back with lots of tangential ideas, and then you'll scratch your head and you'll be like, oh, it doesn't quite fit because of X, Y, and Z, and actually, what you find is you're editing your people, and you always have to do that to a degree, but you don't want to have to edit your people. What you really want is for them to go into that and be able to kind of self-filter themselves to say, do you know what? Based on these 3 or 4 lenses, that idea is never going to fly. So we shouldn't even entertain it. It's just much more efficient, and you get to the right answer very, very quickly that way. But you've got to be clear on those lenses, and that's really hard. I think it's easy to put together a PowerPoint deck for somebody that says this is why we're special, but to figure out what are you going to double down on, what are the things that you do that you're going to say, as a business, we're going to be great at this, and we're going to carry on investing it. We're never going to detract from the brand bank on this particular item, or this piece of functionality, or this characteristic of our business. I think that takes a lot of thought, and you kind of have to iterate on it, because I think I find you put something out there, and then something will come up and we'll make a bad decision somewhere, and you're like, oh, that wasn't the intent, but I can see how they got there. But actually, I need to tweak it a little bit. I need to kind of tune it up always. And I think that tune-up process is really important. So it's never like a one and done thing. It's always a living, breathing set of guidance. And then, but as a leader, I think you really need it, because that is ultimately how you make sure that you're empowering your people to deliver on the strategy that you need to go and deliver on.
Brilliant. Now, just thinking of the audience here as well, what I'm hearing there, Todd, is about being, as a leader's responsibility to provide context and directionally. So this is where we're heading, but the sort of why, the what, and a bit of the how are really critical. But that being an iterative process and enough flexibility, is that a fair summary then?
Yeah, I think so. And actually, we didn't really talk much about how we behave, but I mean, I think that comes through really importantly. So you take there are very successful companies that behave in very different ways. So you take Uber at one extreme, right? Or the Goldman Sachs model. We're going to pay you really well, but we're going to ask for your life in return, right? We're going to expect the hours. We can expect you to, and that is a model. It's a model that has clearly created some very, very successful companies. And then the other end, you got the Silicon Valley model. We're going to turn up at 11 o'clock in the morning and in trainers and an unwashed t-shirt, and I think and equally it's built some very successful companies. And I think it's important for companies to find their own place in that. But I think you need to articulate to employees what your model is. Because I think otherwise you do end up in these circular debates around we should all be working harder, or we should all be working less, or we should all be doing this differently. And I think you need to be, as a leader, you need to be very clear around what those expectations are in your company.
Well, the nice thing about what you just said as well is actually those debates sort of don't make us go forward; they make us go side to side, don't they? Whereas if we actually, this is how we behave, and we haven't behaved. So on that front, I know we share a passion for what I think we both term as a healthy conflict and candid conversations at a leadership level. Really interested if you could share your lens on that.
Yeah, I mean, I think, I guess, first of all, conflict needs a foundation where people can, it needs to be an environment where it can happen in a safe way. And so I think, good conflicts clearly starts with trust. And I think, one of the things that great companies do, I think, is they foster high levels of trust across the organization. And again, this is where the shared values comes in, actually. If you're, if you have a set of good values, and I think, some level of respect or dignity has to be somewhere in your value set, then it does create the environment where you can have good conversations, and you're not fearful of the repercussions of them. And it's okay to say some stupid stuff. I mean, I say lots of stupid things. The important thing is you've got somebody in the team say, "Oh, that's a stupid idea, and let's move forward," rather than otherwise you end up with Putin, right? Kind of that issue where we're all going to invade this country, and maybe it wasn't so easy as we thought it was going to be, but no one ever had the balls to tell him, right? I mean, I think that's a low trust, low debate environment, and you see what happens. So I think you need to have trust, but I think beyond that, there are some things as leaders you need to do, which propagate and enable that healthy debate to go and happen. I think, one of the things that leaders do need to do is mind for it. And, you need to sit there, if somebody's not talking up in a debate, then it's important to be like, what do you think though? Why do you think that? And kind of try and bring some of these things out, because it is easy, right? I think people are inherently, conflict avoidant, and if you've got somebody who's got like a really strong opinion on something in a room, you might not agree with it, but you might just go along because honestly, it's just easier than getting stuck in. And the downside of that, obviously, you leave the room and you go back and you're like, well, we decided this, guys, and I don't quite agree with it, but we'll pull the line for the company. And no one's committed to it, right? And it doesn't happen. And then about 6 months later, you're like, yeah, I told you it's a bad idea. And you kind of got to get those things out front. And so the leader's job, I think, is to say, if they figure out if there is dissent. And actually, we use this. It's not my idea. We stole it. None of it's my idea, right? It's all stuff I've learned on the path. We use this really simple mechanism called fist or five. So if you've got a room with, let's say, 8 people in there, and there's something you're debating and you want to get to a conclusion, rather than going around the table and debate it again and again, you say, if this fist or fives it, and if everyone did a 5, it's like rock paper scissors, give it a 5, everyone agrees. And you're like, oh, done, move on. If everyone's a 4 or 5, but you got somebody who's a 2, and you're like, okay, then why are you 2? Speak up, and then you can decide. Then you might be like, get your a 2, but everyone else is basically there. Is there anything we need to change to get you on board, and let's move forward? And I think it's a really simple. It cuts a lot of noise out of meetings and actually enables you to move very, very quickly. It's a really good device. I think the other thing about debate is very easy to stray into the personal. Kind of like, well, we're here because John didn't do that, you never say what you're going to do on time. You've crossed from that Rubicon of being like, this is a professional, like what are the things we're trying to get done here, to an attack on an individual. And actually, when you allow that to happen, it becomes harder for somebody to talk up because they feel fearful, right? And I think again, you need to look out for that, and it's important to be like, to kind of, you can get close to that line, but to be like, no, you went too far there. Let's just pull it back a little bit and make sure we keep this on the right side of professional, what we're trying to solve as a business. And then I think the other key thing about conflict is you've got to talk about the right stuff. And I'm sure you've heard of it. There's this Parkinson, a naval historian, I think he was, from 100 years or so ago. He had this notion of bike shedding, and he studied these people who were designing a nuclear reactor, and they spent more time talking about the materials we used in the bike shed than they did in the actual nuclear reactor themselves. Like disproportionately, people go to simple problems to go and solve. And so when you're having debate, and you'll see it in the office now, people spend more time debating about whether you should have a wine fridge in the office than they will real customer problems, because we all get it. Like, it's easy to get into. It's really easy to like have an opinion on, and so and I think it's important to make sure that the debates happen around stuff that really matters. It's got to be consequential. It's got to be something that you need debate on, right? You need diverse opinions on, and I think it's really important that you focus your debating energy and effort on stuff that makes a difference, and kind of you don't fall into that trap of like, whose job is it to order the toilet roll this week?
Yeah, brilliant. So there's so much there. It's fascinating. If I could just go a little bit further there, though, how have you built that muscle, and how have you built that muscle then?
So a few different things, right? I think some of it's just experience, some of it's training, and I think it's a lot of this stuff actually I found it's most effective to go on this this sort of training as a leadership team. It's one thing to go and do a course, but actually I think when as a leadership team, and we do this at Divido, we put everyone through the same leadership training at the same time, and they learn all the techniques together, and that helps helps us hold each other to account on it. And we talk about kind of the mechanisms we have to reinforce the right behaviours. We talk about we've got a language we developed as a team which help us kind of stay true to it. So when I talk about stuff that's really important, we talk about keeping it in the triangle. And I can't remember what it came from. Like it came from, there's a theory somewhere. I can't remember what the sides of the triangle are, but it just means they talk about what matters. And we all know it, and therefore it's kind of a shorthand, and it helps move things forward quickly. But like all things, it's kind of it's practice, it's constant feedback, and doing your best to be self-aware, which I think is a hard thing to do, but making sure that you're kind of constantly trying to think about the impact you're having on other people and why, and kind of coming back to some of this stuff. And I think you've got to do it repeatedly. I think you've got to come back to the theory a lot, otherwise it never gets embedded. You can't do this, we're going to get a training course for 2 days, we're going to come back, and then it's because you forget about it.
Wow. So I could go down this rabbit hole quite a bit here, Todd. This is fascinating. So final one on this, I promise, is so how do you then hold each other to account? Because there's going to be times when you go, actually, do you know what? That's our value. And actually, whether it's been personally crossed or whatever, because, we might be 4 o'clock in the afternoon, somebody might be tired, whatever the why. But how do you then go, actually, that's unacceptable, or receive that yourself?
I think the first step to accountability is for it's just review. Like it's actually, and this is, I think a lot of project management techniques are very good at this actually. It's not actually, I think people think of accountability as always being a hard conversation. Something's not happened, how do I hold somebody to account? That's what I should be doing. I think actually the best accountability, and the OKR framework's a great thing for this as well. It's like saying, on Friday, just so you guys know, we're going to review the OKRs, and then everyone's just thinking, oh shit, what? Okay, let's get this done, and it happens. And so I think the best accountability is actually before the fact and not after the fact. And there's always going to be stuff, right? I mean, actually, the OKR. What I like about the OKR framework is it admits that not everything's going to get done. I think one of my last leader, Mike Latham, one of his wisdoms was what makes a great leader is not achieving all your goals, it's the ones that you choose not to do, because the context has changed and the world has moved on. And you say at the beginning of the year, we're going to get these things done. If you do all those things at the end of the year, you could still fail. And actually, you need to find your path through the year as facts emerge. And I think that's it's an important lesson that I've taken forward. And the OKR framework, I think, acknowledges that as well. It's like, if you've done 100% of this, then you weren't ambitious enough, and you might not be working on all the right things. So 70% is good enough.
Brilliant. Yeah, it reminds me of a leader I knew many years ago who was he quite often would say this to his CEO: I've got you've asked me to do 130% of something. My team and I only have 100 at best, and they're going to have some slack in between. I'm acknowledging everything is important, but which 90% is vital. And you know what? The caliber, when it first happened, there was a bit of tension, but when that happened and got implemented throughout the organization, as they were trying to drive towards IPO at the time, it really changed the way they worked, and it made a dramatic. But it forced better conversations, and as you say, it took the irrelevant out. So no, that's a great analogy and great way of getting stuff done.
I think just on that, building that a little bit as well. I think a lot of meeting methodologies have a lot to blame for. So this idea of like, we'll record all the actions and then every week we'll come back to the actions. I've seen it where I've come into teams where you're like, but I know somebody said they'd do this, but they haven't done it. It's a reason they haven't done it, right? So at some point, you just cross it off the list and move forward. I think, it's kind of like this, this project management idea of like, we've got to tick everything off all the time, actually isn't a very efficient way of working often.
Well, as you said earlier, it's about iteration and knowing we're still heading in the right direction, and is that direction we want to still be headed in is actually really important too.
Right.
Brilliant. No, loving this. So within your career, who have been the most influential people on you becoming an authentic leader? Because you really strike me as somebody who shows up as you. So
it took me, I actually went on training once by one of these big American companies, a two-day training course on authentic leadership. And I can't remember what we learned in it, but it was interesting because whilst it was part of the training mechanism, it didn't fit the culture. The culture at that company was polish. It wasn't to bring your personal self. It was to turn up looking smart, on time every day. Put your personal life to one side. You're at work now, and when you wouldn't go into a meeting without being prepared because you thought it through, and you'd be, I'm not saying will be some things are bad things, by the way, but you should be on time. You should be prepared for your meetings. But like, it was all about polish, and it was all about being the best version of yourself. It's actually when I came into the startup world, and I got some feedback from somebody on a feedback 360 session that I was inscrutable. And I had to go and look it up in a dictionary. I had to go and look it up as well. I nodded and I was like, "Thank you for that feedback." And I was definitely like, "What's that mean?" And it just means hard to read. And it took me a while to understand why, but I think it's because I was brought up in this world of polish. I was brought up to actually always be professional. And it was only then that I over-indexed on sharing, what am I worried about? What do I think could go wrong? Showing a bit of weakness, right? Sharing the fact that night before last, I got 2 hours sleep because my son was up all night because he was sick, and therefore I'm not my best today. If I get some stuff wrong, then sorry, but call me out on it as well. And I think that does create a sense of personal connection. I think that's really important. And I'd say, I don't know, there's any one individual who molded me down that route, but there are loads of people. There are lots of bits of feedback which you're like, in hindsight, you look back and you're like, that's what that meant. I didn't quite get it at the time, but now I do.
Brilliant. So wow, that's fascinating how that's so the environment, the multiple environments sort of shaping you and now enabling you ultimately to show up as you.
Yeah, exactly.
Brilliant. So what do you wish you knew earlier on in your life? This is the 21-year-old question that you know today. What do you wish you knew that would sort of chat with the wiser you now, chatting with the younger self?
I think I'm of a generation, and I guess a socioeconomic background that there is a preordained track when you're younger, right? Kind of like you go to school, you do your GCSEs, you do your A levels, you go to university, you try and get to a good one, and assuming all of that goes well, then you go and join a you go into a blue chip career, and that could be, or maybe not blue chip. You go either become a doctor, you become an accountant, but if you're going to be an accountant, you go with PwC. If you're kind of like you try and get into these big, if you're going to be an engineer, you go work for Rolls-Royce. And I think that was just kind of like the expected thing to go and do. And I think it pushes people down a career path that might not be them. And I think the thing that I was always perfectly good at working in big companies. I was I was good at my job. I got stuff done. I got promoted. It was a place where I was perfectly happy. But I didn't understand it wasn't my best self. It wasn't where I could do my best work. It wasn't where I was most fulfilled. And it wasn't until I made the jump to a startup world that I really understood just how much better it was for me personally. And there's other people for whom working in a big company is absolutely the right thing to go and do. So it's horses for courses, right? I'm not saying everyone should go work in startups, but I think I don't know what I would have known then, though, to to kind of unpick that problem apart from
Okay.
experiencing it. So maybe the advice is do lots of different things. Don't assume that the track you start off on is the track you end up on, and actually it's worth flipping things. But I guess counter to that is actually we just came out of a really interesting discussion where we're looking at what can we do to just get better at retaining talent, and one of the key indicators that we found for where we see people with short tenures is they've had short tenures before. And I think there's a lot of young people now who they come out of university and they'll do a job for like a year and a half, 2 years, and they'll go to the next company, and they accelerate very fast in their career until somebody's like, "You've never done anything," because you've never actually been in the job for long enough to achieve anything. And so I do think there's the counter to that. You need to try a few things, but it's also important to stick things out a little bit. You've got to. Yeah, I don't know what the ideal tenure is, but increasingly I'm very wary of hiring people who don't have kind of tenures of more than 3-4 years at a particular company, because it indicates either they're a bit flighty, or they're not very good and they keep on being moved on, frankly. And I think it's really important to look at that. But I do think people should be open to diverse experiences and working in different kinds of places, and they should be flexible in their career path.
Brilliant. So I'm getting the feeling there that almost you have to endure it, or you have to experience it to actually shape it. It's a bit like you were saying about who shaped you over time, and actually getting in different environments. And I've certainly felt that in my career, actually different environments, but taking different things from them, but actually that does shape you over a period of time. Is that what you're sort of alluding to there?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, there's never a silver bullet, right? You never go and meet the Jedi who tells you, here's a single font of wisdom. I'm like, of course not. You take different things from different people all the way through your career, and so long as you're open to that, that's important.
Brilliant. Well, look, Todd, normally this is the time when I sort of try and gather about sort of 3 or 4 takeaways, but there's been so many here. I've got a couple of pages of notes.
Oh, golly.
Yes, thank you. No, it's been fantastic. We'll have to get you on again. I think the fascinating thing for me was actually standing out there about actually, firstly, taking your own career and almost from a marketeer here, what's your value proposition? What's your North Star? Where are you heading? Actually, just remembering a lot of this audience are in business to business, and actually connecting with customers above speeds and feeds and this sort of piece as well, and actually making that story critical. But I think the theme that's gone through this for me, if there was one word, it would be 2 words: trust and curiosity. Building trust with customers, building trust with your leaders and your leadership team, building trust with your employees. It leads to a sort of glue that enables those candid conversations to occur. And then the final one for me really is about actually trusting a path, actually, but also feeling a little bit of uncomfortableness to move between different environments, but actually stay and nail something and do something. So you can actually say, yeah, whilst I was here, I did this, I delivered it, I was a starter completer, and actually now I'd like to go somewhere else and play with that a little bit. There's so many more, but is there anything else you'd like to sort of add to that?
I think it's a great summary. It's you captured a lot from a long conversation, so
thank you. Well, look, as I say, there were so many places I wanted to go and uplift more and explore more, so I'd love to do that at a different time with you. But thank you so much for taking the time out. I really appreciate this, and I know the audience will have lots of questions about this, so really appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Adrian. Thanks for having me.